Welcome to the fifth overview for the novel entitled Iara's Crossing. My name is Diana Pomeroy, and I'm an author, I'm an educator, and I'm an artist. And in this video, I'm going to share about the character Flash, who's illustrated here on this slide. I'm going to share this character's backstory information as well as a little brief history of this character. And how he's connected to Iara and her story and how this character actually came to be. If you'd like to know more about my book, so my first published book here, Iara's Crossing, which I'm holding up to the screen, this book is available right now through Indiegogo. So if you back my Indiegogo project, you get a paperback copy of this book. You get some additional swag materials that I've already shown in another video on my YouTube channel. So feel free to back this project. I really appreciate everyone that has backed this project so far. I am so proud of how far I've come in telling this story. And all of that said, I just wanted to bring up a brief content warning. I did have the opening screen with that, but I just wanted to point out that this particular overview is going to take on a very different tone than what I did in the previous. So in the previous videos of backstories on different characters. And this is because this particular character influences Iara's trajectory as a character, but also as because this character's arc is definitely on the darker side. This is a character that is a general antagonist to Iara, but I want you all to realize that this character also has undergone his own form of trauma. And as a result, there's going to be mention of traumatic events. There's going to be mention of emotional manipulation and abuse that this character decides to behave in ways that are unsavory. And so if you find that this topic is not one that you are up for listening about, in particular in regards to this story, then feel free to click away and watch another video of mine on my YouTube channel, either my educational videos, or you can go ahead and watch these videos about Iara's Crossing and other characters in the backstory. You can also feel free to check out my website, which is warriorfeathercreations.weebly.com, to find out more information about this book and about these characters without having to fully immerse yourself in this part of the storyline. So I just want to let everybody know before I got started how this story is going to go. And so let's go ahead and get into it. So Flash as a character was a character that originated in the story that I wrote, and I actually have the story here. That's shown here on this slide. This is the story called Emerald Green Eyes, and this is actually the sequel to the first one. And in this story, the title character, Raptor, who, if you watch my previous video on Iara and her backstory, that's who Iara originally was. This character, Raptor, needed a guide to go through the dense tropical rainforests of portions of South America and Central America. And so what Raptor did was somehow stumbled across a jaguar by the name of Flash. So in this story, I had already created this character named Flash. This story comes from, I believe, 1998. So I wrote this story a very long time ago, and I already had this idea of this jaguar character who acted like a mentor, acted like a guide for Iara even then. And in later iterations of Iara's Crossing, the comic book that was never to be, and the earlier forms of the novel, I did away with this jaguar character. So it's interesting. This jaguar character makes an appearance in Emerald Green Eyes 2 in the 90s and then just disappears. So Flash kind of fades away in the background for a while and doesn't even make an appearance until I developed a new character named Quetzal, based on a bird by the same name. And Quetzal had a very different role in Iara's Crossing when I initially started writing the story. Quetzal was more of like the comic relief character, kind of also a guide, but more of a comic relief to Iara's more serious tone. Very different character than what eventually became the Flash that was developed for the novel of Yara's Crossing. So Quetzal was, of course, modeled after the bird Quetzal, and in when I started writing Iara's Crossing, when I started writing the novelization, I recognized that obviously Quetzals and jaguars technically don't exist in a prehistoric world. They instead would have counterparts that are uh, prehistoric. So I chose Confucius ornis as my base model for this bird character. And that's also partly because the time that I started rewriting Yara's Crossing, I started and stopped for several years. Between, I think, 2012 and around 2019, I started and stopped with the story, did several revised drafts and things like that. You may have seen some previous versions of the character Flash as a Confucius ornis transforming into a jaguar, which is shown here on this slide as well in the above me. In this illustration. And so I actually chose to do away with that altogether with the latest iteration of Yara's Crossing, the most current one that's going to be published. This character, this Confucius ornis type character, was initially written as a mentor to Iara. So that theme of here's a guide, right, that Iara needs as she travels in this landscape. Becoming this invaluable source of information and potentially having a little bit of humor sprinkled in there. And when I started writing Flash's character and I had this bird turn into a jaguar, the jaguar represented this much more fierce nature, represented this rage that was ever present in this character for some reason. And so I just decided to eventually focus more on the jaguar aspect of this character, and that jaguar went away again and became something entirely different, became a new species, again referencing the more prehistoric lens that I went through with this story. So how exactly Flash changed and why is something that I'm going to be talking about on the next slide. And again, this is kind of your last warning. You can click away now if you don't really want to learn more about, if you're sensitive to emotional manipulation, abusive behavior. Now is your time to click away. But let's go ahead and get into how this character Flash became the actual antagonist in Yara's story. So on this slide, we have more recent and modern iterations of this character Flash. On the upper left, we've got some illustration. We got an illustration that I made in 2018 where Flash is basically facing off against Clepsydra. And if you want to learn more about Clepsydra, who that character is, please check out my previous YouTube video on the backstory of Clepsydra. She is one of Yara's actual mentors in the novel. So they also have their shape changed forms below them in the older iteration. Again, it was a jaguar and a tiger. In the newer iteration, it's a little bit different. To find out what Clepsydra turns into, again, please check out that other video. But Flash in this iteration turns into a saber-toothed cat. Now, a lot of folks who read my book had this question, and folks that beta read the book also were asking me, why did you choose a saber-toothed cat? And the thing is, when we consider the evolutionary path of big cats, that seems to be the direction that they went, both with big and small cats, that saber-toothed cats were a thing. Getting away from the Cretaceous period, the next time frame would be the Paleogene, and so during that period of geologic time, that's when we started to get a lot of saber-toothed creatures, not just cats, but also deer and other weird stuff. So there was a lot of interesting stuff back then that decided to go for the long fang look, I guess. And so saber-toothed cats are really the next phase in evolution in that sense, and we're talking about predatory type of creature. Now you may be thinking, but Confucius ornis type birds are not necessarily predatory. Well, there is evidence from a couple of different fossils and just from the strength of their talons and the shape of their beak alone, there's evidence that these creatures could have been opportunists. much like crows of today, much like other types of birds, seabirds that have very sharp beaks. It's very likely that these birds could have hunted and eaten other organisms living in a lake type environment. They could have had like fish or clams or other creatures they could have consumed. So it's likely that, this animal could have displayed those properties in life. And so in my story, not so much, but in my story, it's interesting because I chose, again, this shape changing ability for Flash. And so I'm going to get into now, like, who this character is. And as I said in the previous sections of this video, I warned you that this section starts to get a little dark. So Flash is the antagonist. He's a villain in Iara's story. And Flash has his own set of trauma that he's been dealt in his life. Um, Flash is a character that's so completely engrossed in his own pain and his own frustration and his own tragedy that he doesn't see anything else or anyone else except as extensions of himself. So Flash's trauma really begins when he's younger. He has a family, he had a home, and unfortunately, as depicted like in the lower left corner of this screen, we've got a similar looking bird fleeing from a volcanic eruption event. So something similar did happen to Flash early on in his life. Prior to that event, though, Flash made the choice to basically physically assault, potentially kill, and emotionally weaponize Clepsydra. So he made that choice when he was younger. He chose to abuse her and seize her power. At least he wanted to. Okay, so that was his end goal, was to seize her power. And when he lost everything in his life, his family, his home, everything was destroyed by this volcanic eruption, which again is something that happened out of everyone's control. There is no controlling natural disaster events, right? These types of phenomena happen, they are tragic, and Flash was a victim of that tragedy. And so when Flash went to Clepsydra at the Oasis for help, she obviously refused him. And this began his true downfall. This began his path towards embracing his ego instead of evolving into, a higher, form of communication and being. Instead of bettering himself and learning how to heal, he decided to take his rage and his anger out not only on Clepsydra, but on every warrior feather that would follow, and that included Iara. So Iara just kind of, unfortunately, was caught up in this path of destruction that Flash decided to wreak on, everything that ever hurt him. And so he's directing all of this inner turmoil out. And also there's this kind of like creep factor that I employed with this character too, where, and I'm sure any of us that have experienced these types of individuals, you know what I'm talking about, okay? You know that there are certain individuals that are predators, that are very charming, that are also just insidious in how they work. And Flash stalks his victims, gets to know everything about who these individuals are, and uses that information to further just himself and his ego. Now, of course, Flash also reports to another creature in the story, reports to Woundtooth, who is a T-Rex, a tyrant. Well, not exactly T-Rex, okay, so understand that in Iara's Crossing, I did away with a lot of the scientific terminology here. I stuck with generic terms, but essentially, Flash is subservient to a tyrant named Woundtooth in the story, and you'll learn more about Woundtooth in the next video. So in the next video, I'm going to talk more about Moongaze, I'm going to talk more about Wingtooth, I'm going to talk more about these other secondary characters that do play a vital role in Iara's journey and Iara's crossing. And so Flash, as a character, does not care about the harm that he causes to others, emotional, physical, or otherwise. Does not care. Just will harm others just to get ahead, to stay ahead. Because that's all that Flash cares about is the power, because that was taken from him. And so all he cares about is getting that power back, and he will do so in the most horrifically manipulative ways. So everything around Flash, including Wingtooth, is a projection, an extension of who he is. It's not who he is inside, like, per se. So he is always going to be wounded. He is going to be hurt. He's never going to heal from that. And like I said, I'm sure that when I'm describing this character to you, some of you are nodding like you know who these types of characters are in your own lives outside of this book. And so when I set out to write this character, initially, I did not necessarily base this character on any one individual, just so you all know. This character is based on several individuals that I've encountered throughout my life that have this kind of behavior and display this kind of behavior, and unfortunately do not learn how to heal from this behavior, do not choose to change, because being set in these ways means that those individuals will stay in power. And refusing to step down from that and refusing to recognize nor take responsibility for past behavior, something else too that I included in this story, was that here's a character who, Flash is a character that just absolutely refuses to acknowledge what he's done in the past, refuses to help Clepsydra when she's down, refuses to help anyone when they're down, and is only really looking out for himself. And it's this kind of inner darkness that I wanted to create. And this is the complete antithesis to Iara, where Iara's character is more about, yes, she's experiencing self-doubt, unfortunately, as the words and behavior of this character, Flash, amongst other things, amongst her own inner dialogue in her head, right? And we all, for those of us who are anxious individuals like myself, who struggle with mental health, this is definitely a character that would represent any individuals that you may encounter in your life that take advantage of the fact that you yourself are not sure about who you are and who you want to be. And Flash enters Iara's story at this moment when she is unsure of who she is and who she wants to be. And yet his presence is necessary to push her forward, not in the ways that are necessarily healthy, but in the ways that definitely give Iara a choice. And Iara sees that she has a choice. Either she falls into the trap that Flash did, falls into the tar that he did, is mired in his own depression and grief and anger, or she finds a way to rise above, and she finds a way to get away. And it's ironic because Flash has this bird form, and yet he chooses his behavior. And so when you read the novel, you'll get a chance to understand how this character changes, if at all, throughout the story. You get to understand some of the things that Flash says and does towards the other characters in the story, and the interactions between him and Wingtooth. You'll see how these two characters are connected as well as Flash's connection to Moongaze. So this is something also I'll be touching on in the next video, but it's something I do want you to read about in the story. So I'm not going to give away too much more, but I also want to point out to you that when Flash shape changes, when he goes from this bird form to the saber-toothed cat, it's more of a mechanism of rage and anger rather than a mechanism of survival and calm. So it's the complete opposite. So the magic of shape changing is something that has been distorted here. And this is a concept that I will continue to bring out in the sequel to Iara's Crossing, which I will be drafting over the summer. So I do have some bits and pieces of the first chapter written, so I'm really excited to continue this story and to continue bringing it to you. And you'll get to see what happens with Flash in Iara's Crossing in the novel. But for now, speaking of the novel, let's get into the character sheet and let's take a look at this full character of Flash in Iara's Crossing. All right, so this is the character sheet of Flash. Here we have Flash as he's presented in the novel. On the left, we've got the avian form, which again is similar to Confucius Horn. It's not entirely the same, but similar. Color scheme, I think, was based on a green jay. I could be mistaken, though. Please, anyone in the comments, please correct me. Folks that are familiar with bird patterns and colors, I don't recall, unfortunately, off the top of my head, which bird I based him on initially. But you'll notice that Flash also has a talisman around his neck that's a feather. This is, again, different than the ammonite that we've learned about so far in the story. So you'll learn how the feather plays a role actually later on in the novel and then also in the sequel. So there's going to be more to that coming up. But Flash transforms into the saber-toothed cat, which is shown on the right here. We've got the tan coats, these like reddish-looking rosettes all over on saber-toothed cat's body. And this particular saber-toothed cat, I chose to have the fangs outside the mouth. I know there's a new paper that just came out that talked about how some species of saber cats had a pouch in the mouth so they could hide their fangs. This particular version, I chose to have the fangs hanging out. So again, just as I've said before, this is a fantasy novel. So understand the way I've envisioned these creatures is definitely going to be distinctly different from the way that they may or may not be presented in the scientific literature. So if you're a scientist, you're reading this, you're going, oh, well, you know, that's not how they look. That's okay. You can use your imagination and determine how they look. Don't necessarily have to use my character sheets that are in the back of the book, but hey, that's entirely up to you. But anyway, just put that out there because I know folks that watch this video, they may be coming from my educational channel, they may be coming from any academic background. Hey, you know, just so you know, just clarifying there. And again, in his avian form, Flash has mastered flight. So flight is something that the other avians don't necessarily have figured out yet. And yet Flash has mastered it. And again, this is a concept I will come back to in the sequel to Iara's Crossing. But in this story, Flash can fly on thermals. He has the capability of not only soaring, but also flapping flight. And it's this kind of power that, like I said in the previous slide, is corrupted, is twisted. And it's something that will, again, come around full circle in this novel as well as in the sequel. So like I said, I'm really excited to bring the next story in this series, I suppose, to you. It could be a series, it could be a duology, I'm not entirely sure yet. But we'll learn more about the secondary characters in Iara's Crossing besides the ones I presented to you already. So if you want to check out the previous videos on the characters in the novel Iara's Crossing, that includes Iara, Tlactok, Clepsydra, and now Flash. If you want to watch these videos again, feel free to check out my YouTube channel and watch the previous videos, get some more background on these characters before you dive in to the book. And let's move on to the last slide, and I'll talk more about where you can find info to get the book. So like I said, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this content, thank you for watching the entire video, by the way. I really appreciate you making the time to do that. And again, if you want to find out where to get the paperback copy of this book for 50% off the list price, folks, that's a lot, okay? 50% off the list price of this book, which will be available in the Lulu bookstore, be available on my website next month. So I'm so excited to bring this book to you. I'm so excited to bring this story to you about Iara and all the characters that she meets along the way in her journey, and where her journey will end up, you'll find out when you read the book. So I really hope that you liked this video. If you did, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Our YouTube credo here. make sure that you do that. Otherwise, I'd like to say thank you for those of you who are watching this, whatever day, time that you're watching this video. Thank you so much for supporting me and my project. And I look forward to sharing more information about Iara's Crossing with you as the Indiegogo draws to a close. You only have about 15 days left to contribute to this project. Please check out the description. It's linked in the description box below. So again, thank you everybody for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.